Tonight, dim the lights, turn on a fan if you have one, for that soft and meaningless background hum, the kind that sounds almost like distant rain, or a very tired castle ghost trying to remember where it left its shoes. Because tonight, we are stepping into Tudor England, an England of kings with enormous appetites, queens with dangerous families, muddy streets, smoky fireplaces, suspiciously fashionable beards, and, according to popular imagination, one gigantic cloud of body odor drifting slowly across the countryside. You know the picture. Everyone is filthy. Nobody bathes. Every nobleman smells like wet wool, onions, and a horse that has recently lost an argument with a swamp. And every peasant, apparently, exists only to cough in a muddy lane while holding a turnip. But here is the first uncomfortable truth. The Tudors were not nearly as carefree about smelling bad as we like to imagine. They did not live in a sparkling world of tiled bathrooms, hot showers, industrial soap, deodorant, laundry detergent, or little bottles promising mountain freshness. That would have sounded like sorcery. But they also did not wake up each morning, stretch their arms, and say, "Well, another beautiful day to smell like an abandoned goat." They washed. They groomed themselves. They changed linen when they could. They used flowers, herbs, perfumes, scented waters, and strange little containers full of fragrance. They worried about bad smells because they believed bad smells could carry disease, which is not correct. But it does explain why a Tudor person might hold a fragrant object under their nose when walking through London. Not because they were trying to look elegant, although that was always welcome, but because they thought the air itself might be plotting against them. And to be fair, in some parts of London, the air was making a very convincing case. The Tudor period lasted from 1485 to 1603. It was an age that saw England change dramatically. The country experienced religious upheaval, political terror, growing trade, population pressure, new ideas, and regular reminders that life could end because of plague, childbirth, infection, bad food, bad water, or simply being noticed by Henry VIII at the wrong time. It was not a peaceful age. It was not a clean age by modern standards. But it was not an age without cleanliness. That is the important difference. The Tudor world was not one smell. It was 1,000 different smells, depending on where you stood. And who could afford clean linen? Imagine a quiet Tudor village at dawn. There is damp grass underfoot, wood smoke rising from chimneys, cows moving in a muddy yard, bread baking somewhere nearby. A woman opens a door and throws wash water outside. A dog investigates it with the seriousness of a royal inspector. The air is cool. There is smoke, earth, animals, damp wool, and cooking. Not lovely, perhaps, but not necessarily unbearable. Now move into a crowded London street. The lanes are narrow. Houses lean toward each other overhead. Horses pass by. Traders shout. Fires burn coal or wood. Waste is carried away badly, slowly, or sometimes not at all. Chamber pots exist. Cesspits exist. Drains are not having their best century. And suddenly, yes, the smell becomes a little more ambitious. This is where the myth gets its power. When people imagine Tudor England, they often imagine only the worst possible corner of a crowded city. During rains, beside a full cesspit, while someone is tanning leather nearby. And then they assume the entire country smelled exactly like that. But that is like visiting one modern train station toilet after a football match and deciding that every house in the world smells identical. It is not history. It is a very unfair scented candle. The Tudors did not avoid washing because they loved dirt. They avoided certain kinds of washing because water itself could seem dangerous. Now that sounds strange. Water is water. Water is good. Water is nice. Water is what you want after walking behind a horse through a London street in July. But Tudor people did not understand germs in the modern sense. They did not know about bacteria. They did not know about viruses. They did not know that microscopic organisms could live on hands, clothing, food, or water. They did know that people got sick. They knew sickness could arrive suddenly and horribly. They knew plague could empty houses. They knew that foul air often seemed to surround disease. So many believed that illness traveled through corrupted air. Bad vapors, dangerous smells. This idea is often called miasma theory. In simple terms, they thought a bad smell might not merely be unpleasant. They thought it might be deadly, which means that for a Tudor person, smelling nice was not simply about romance. It could be about survival. A little bag of lavender, a bunch of flowers, rosemary, mint, scented water, a pomander filled with spices or perfume. These were not always luxuries. They were tiny shields against an invisible enemy. Unfortunately, the invisible enemy was often not the smell itself. But the Tudor person had no way of knowing that. And when you are walking through a crowded city, where the river receives all kinds of unpleasant gifts from its citizens, a clove-studded orange probably feels emotionally necessary. Not medically necessary, but emotionally. Absolutely. Now, before we laugh too much at them, it is worth remembering that modern people also buy candles called things like ocean breeze, autumn forest, and fresh linen. We do this while sitting beside bins full of packaging, traffic fumes, and a refrigerator containing something that should probably be removed. Humanity has always enjoyed pretending scent can defeat reality. Are the Tudors, one of the most important tools of cleanliness was not a bathtub. It was linen. Clean linen. This sounds disappointingly unglamorous. It is not a jeweled crown. It is not a royal sword. It is not even a haunted monastery. It is underwear. But Tudor linen was doing some serious work. A linen shirt, shift, smock, or other underlayer sat close to the skin. It absorbed sweat and body oils. It could be removed and washed more often than heavy outer clothes made of wool, silk, velvet, or other expensive fabrics. The outer garments might be difficult to clean. They might be costly. They might be stiff, elaborate, richly dyed, embroidered, padded, or covered in enough fabric to upholster a small chair. But the linen beneath them could help keep the body and clothing more manageable. For wealthy people, clean white linen was even a public signal. A bright white collar or cuff suggested that someone had enough clothes, enough servants, enough water, enough fuel, and enough household organization to keep linen washed. In other words, a clean cuff was not just a clean cuff. It was a tiny white flag, announcing that you were doing better than your neighbors. The rich could afford more garments, more servants, more laundry, more replacement linen. They could change clothes frequently, even several times in a day on formal occasions. The poor had fewer garments and less time. They worked harder physically. They lived closer to animals, smoke, mud, and dirty water. They could not casually replace a stained shirt because it had encountered a difficult afternoon. For them, cleanliness was not always about desire. It was about resources. Water had to be collected. Fuel had to be burned. Soap had to be made or bought. Clothes had to be scrubbed. Drying took time. Laundry was labor. And labor, as always, had a habit of landing on the people with the least power to avoid it. The famous Tudor bathtub existed, but it was not the daily ritual most people imagine. A hot bath was possible, but it was not simple. You needed a tub. You needed water. You needed someone to carry that water. You needed fuel to heat it. You needed time. Then you needed somewhere to throw the used water afterward, which was a small detail modern bathrooms have very kindly solved for us. For many households, a full bath meant effort, a great deal of effort. So daily cleanliness did not necessarily mean lowering your entire body into a wooden tub every morning. It could mean washing hands, face, neck, feet, and other parts of the body with a basin, cloth, and water. It could mean combing hair. It could mean cleaning nails. It could mean changing linen. It could mean applying scented water. It could mean trying very hard not to sit too close to the household dog after the household dog had discovered something dead in a ditch. That last one is less well documented, but spiritually true. And this is the heart of the myth. We look at Tudor people and ask, did they shower every day? The answer is no. Then we quietly decide they must have been filthy. But that is the wrong question. A Tudor person might look at us and ask, do you regularly boil cloth, scrub your garments by hand, air your bedding, comb your hair, clean your hands before meals, scent your rooms, and worry that foul air might kill you? And when we say, I ordered detergent online and own 3 hoodies I have not washed since winter, they might look at us with deep concern. Cleanliness changes with technology. It changes with money. It changes with medicine. It changes with living conditions. The Tudors had different standards because they lived in a different world. They had no running hot water. They had no sewage system as we understand it. They had no germ theory. But they had noses. Very sensitive ones. And they knew that certain things smelled bad because certain things were bad. Rotting food, stagnant water, human waste, animal remains, spoiled meat, damp bedding, a crowded room with poor ventilation. These were all dangerous or unpleasant for reasons they could observe, even if they could not explain the invisible causes behind them. So they tried to control smell. They swept rooms. They changed rushes on floors when possible. They used herbs. They burned scented materials. They washed clothing. They aired bedding. They cleaned hands. They combed hair. They used toothpicks and small grooming tools. And they did all this in a world where the smell of smoke, animals, wet wool, cooking fat, leather, mud, and human labor was impossible to remove completely. Not because they did not care, but because the world itself was difficult to wash. And there is another problem with the Tudor stink myth. It turns the past into a joke, a lazy joke. It makes history easier, because then we do not have to imagine people as real human beings. We can simply picture them all as dirty background characters in a television drama. But Tudor people were not background characters. They had preferences. They had embarrassment. They had vanity. They had manners. They had standards. A person in Tudor England could feel shame over dirty clothes. They could worry about the smell of a room. They could feel pride in a clean shirt. They could notice that someone had not washed. They could give advice about grooming. They could complain about foul water. They could carry perfume. They could try to make themselves presentable before meeting someone important. Exactly as people do now, only with more fireplaces and fewer mirrors that politely lie to you with flattering bathroom lighting. So tonight, remember this. Tudor England was not clean in the modern sense. There were places where the smell must have been brutal. There were crowded streets, cesspits, smoky homes, dirty rivers, muddy shoes, overworked bodies, and little protection from waste. But the Tudors were not indifferent to it. They did not simply surrender to filth. They fought it with the tools they had. With linen, with water, with combs, with flowers, with herbs, with perfume, with fire, with household labor, with stubbornness, and sometimes with a small scented object held desperately under the nose while walking through London. In the next module, we will enter the Tudor home itself. We will look at the rush-covered floors, the smoke-darkened walls, the bedding, the laundry, the kitchen, and the strange domestic battlefield between human beings and the smells that followed them everywhere. Because the real question is not whether Tudor England smelled. Of course it smelled. The real question is, what exactly did it smell like? We left Tudor England standing in the street, with a little scented object held beneath its nose, trying very politely not to breathe too deeply. But now, let us go inside. Not into a palace. Not yet. Tonight we enter the Tudor home. And this is where the smell myth becomes more complicated. Because there was no single Tudor house. There were palaces with servants, fireplaces, costly tapestries, polished furniture, clean linen stores, private chambers, and enough rooms for a person to avoid their relatives for an entire afternoon. And then there were cottages, small rooms, shared beds, wet boots, smoke, children, animals nearby, cooking on the fire, laundry that could not wait, and a floor that had been walked on by people who had already walked through mud, manure, rainwater, ash, and whatever the village goose had decided to leave behind. So when someone asks, did Tudor houses smell bad? The only honest answer is, which Tudor house? Which room? Which season? Which family? And most importantly, who was doing the laundry? Because the home was not simply where people rested. It was where they cooked, washed, slept, worked, stored food, raised children, entertained visitors, repaired clothing, dried herbs, prepared medicine, and tried not to catch fire. It was a house, but it was also a workshop, a kitchen, a laundry room, a bedroom, a small warehouse, and, for many families, a place where every domestic task had to happen within a few steps of the same smoky hearth. The first thing you would notice in many Tudor homes was the fire. Fire was warmth. Fire was light. Fire was cooking. Fire was the only reason a winter evening could become something other than a lengthy argument with darkness. But fire also meant smoke. And smoke did not politely stay in one corner of the room. In wealthier houses and many later Tudor homes, chimneys helped guide smoke upward and out. This was a major improvement, though it did not make a house smell like a modern hotel lobby. There would still be ash. There would still be soot. There would still be the permanent smell of burning wood, cooking fat, wet clothing drying too close to the heat, and the vague anxiety of knowing the entire building was made from materials that had a very personal relationship with flame. But in smaller or older style homes, smoke could be much more present. It hung in the air. It darkened timber. It settled into thatch, cloth, hair, and skin. It became part of the interior. A Tudor room could have been cleaned, swept, aired, and tidied, but the house itself might still smell faintly of fire. Not because nobody cared, because smoke was difficult to negotiate with. It does not respect social class. It does not respect careful housekeeping. It does not care that your mother-in-law is coming for dinner. It simply enters the room and settles in as though it owns the property. And yet, smoke was not always seen only as a nuisance. It could help preserve food. It could discourage insects. It could dry damp items. It could keep a room warmer. In a world without electric heating, no one was going to dismiss a fire simply because it made the ceiling look like it had spent several years inside a chimney. The Tudor home was not dirty because people did nothing. It was difficult to keep clean because almost every useful thing also created a mess. Cooking created grease. Animals created waste. Fire created soot. Rain created mud. Children created. Children and laundry created more wet cloth than anyone ever wants to think about. Now let us look down at the floor. This is where popular history becomes unusually confident. People often say, Tudor homes had rushes all over the floor and nobody changed them, so they were packed with old food, rats, dog droppings, and the complete emotional collapse of civilization. It is a wonderful image. It is also too simple. Rushes were used in some spaces, particularly halls and better appointed rooms, often as floor covering or insulation. They could be changed. They could be freshened. Herbs might be added for scent. But rushes were not a magical carpet of filth that covered every Tudor floor in England at all times. Some houses had beaten earth floors. Some had wooden floors. Some had stone. Some had mats. Some rooms were more carefully maintained than others. And in a large household, servants had tasks involving sweeping, cleaning, replacing materials, carrying waste away, and trying to make grand rooms look respectable before somebody important arrived. That does not mean the floor was hygienic by modern standards. It means Tudor people understood that an old, damp, dirty floor covering was unpleasant. They did not need a 20th century cleaning advertisement to explain it. They had noses, and probably fewer excuses than most of us do when we say we will vacuum tomorrow. Imagine a wealthy Tudor hall. There may be a great fire, long tables, heavy timber beams, tapestries on the walls, dogs wandering beneath benches, hoping someone drops dinner, servants moving through the space, candles burning, food being carried in, beer poured, meat carved, and beneath all this, a floor that needs constant attention. A grand hall could smell of roasted meat, smoke, wax, wool, leather, damp stone, dogs, beer, herbs, and perfume. Not disgusting in every moment, but rich, dense, layered, the kind of smell that enters your clothing and remains there long after you have left. Now move to a poor cottage. The smell changes. There is less imported spice, less perfumed wax, less clean linen stored in chests. There may be porridge cooking, wet wool drying, earth floors, wood smoke, a small amount of animal smell drifting in from outside, or perhaps from a structure attached very closely to the living area. The house may be crowded. A family might sleep in limited space. Privacy would be thin. Warmth would matter more than personal space. And in winter, opening windows to air the room was not always a cheerful option. Because fresh air is lovely, but so is not freezing. The dirtiest looking thing in a Tudor home was not always the most dangerous. Sometimes the clean looking thing was the problem. Water could look clear. A wooden cup could look clean. A bowl of broth could smell fine. But contamination was invisible. Tudor people did not understand microbes. They did not know that water sources could carry disease. They did not know that a clean-looking cloth might still hold danger. They judged safety through sight, smell, taste, and custom. And that made sense in their world. A foul-smelling ditch was suspicious. Rotting food was suspicious. Stagnant water was suspicious. A room filled with bad air was suspicious. They were not foolish to notice these things. They were simply missing the scientific map that would explain why some invisible dangers arrived without smell at all, which is deeply unfair. It is one thing to fear a rotten barrel of fish. It is another thing entirely to be defeated by water that looks harmless. And that brings us to laundry. Laundry was not a minor chore. Laundry was an operation. It meant gathering water, heating water, handling heavy wet cloth, using soap or cleaning agents, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, drying, folding, mending, then doing it again, because human beings remain committed to producing dirty clothes. For wealthier households, laundry could involve servants and specialized labor. For ordinary households, it was often part of an endless chain of domestic work, much of it performed by women and girls. And it mattered, because linen was one of the most important barriers between a human body and the outer layers of clothing. A shift, shirt, or smock absorbed sweat and body oils. It could be washed more easily than a costly woolen gown or padded doublet. The outer garment might survive for years. The linen beneath it did the unpleasant work. It was the quiet hero of Tudor hygiene. Not glamorous, not celebrated, not painted in great royal portraits, but extremely useful. History remembers crowns. Daily life was held together by clean fabric. A rich person could own more linen, more shirts, more shifts, more sheets, more towels, more household staff. This made cleanliness easier. A poor person had fewer possessions, fewer replacements, and less time. The same garment might need to endure longer. The same bedding might be harder to wash. The same room might be shared by more people. This is important because smell was not distributed equally. The wealthier you were, the more distance you could place between yourself and domestic labor. You could have servants wash your clothes. Servants empty your chamber pot. Servants sweep your rooms. Servants carry hot water. Servants air your bedding. Servants do the physical work of preventing your household from becoming unbearable. And then naturally, you could appear clean, elegant, and almost effortless. This has been one of the greatest tricks of wealth throughout history. Someone else does the difficult work, and you are praised for looking fresh. Now let us enter the bedroom. This is not the romantic Tudor bedroom of a television drama. There is no soft violin music, no immaculate velvet canopy. No one wakes up with perfect hair and a meaningful expression. A bed could be a serious investment. For a wealthy household, beds might be elaborate with carved frames, curtains, mattresses, sheets, blankets, coverlets, pillows, and expensive textiles. A bed could signal rank. It could appear in inventories. It could be handed down. It could be one of the most valuable objects in the house. For ordinary people, sleep might happen in simpler conditions. A straw-filled mattress, a wool-stuffed mattress, a woven base, a shared bed, a loft, a bench, a space near the warmth of the fire. The exact arrangements varied enormously, but wherever people slept, the same problems waited. Cold, damp, fleas, lice, smoke, crowding, and the deeply unfair fact that bedding is difficult to clean when you have limited water, limited fuel, limited space, and several other people attempting to sleep nearby. Beds could be aired, sheets could be washed, mattresses could be restuffed or refreshed, blankets could be beaten or aired outdoors. People understood that bedding became stale. They understood that insects were unwelcome. They understood that damp cloth was miserable. But knowing a problem exists and being able to solve it completely are very different things. A Tudor person might do everything available to them and still wake up having been personally insulted by a flea. The flea, naturally, had no apology prepared. And then there were chamber pots. We must speak of chamber pots. Not because they are glamorous. They are not. Not because they are mysterious. They are only mysterious if someone leaves one in a dark room and you step too close. But because they reveal something important. People did not simply ignore waste. They tried to manage it. A chamber pot was a practical response to the problem of needing to relieve oneself at night, in cold weather, in crowded houses, or when walking outside was inconvenient. The real question was what happened afterward. In a well-run house, waste might be emptied and removed. In a crowded city, disposal could become much more complicated. Cesspits filled, drains failed, streets became unpleasant. The river received far more than any river deserves. And a household's relationship with cleanliness depended partly on whether it had space, labor, water access, and somewhere safe to take waste. The Tudor stink myth survives because this part is real. Waste management was difficult, very difficult. But again, the difficulty was not indifference. It was infrastructure. It is easy to feel superior to a Tudor household until you remember that your own home has pipes, drains, water pressure, waste treatment bins, cleaning products, washing machines, and the miracle of toilets that remove their own evidence. The Tudors had buckets. The cleanest Tudor homes could still have smelled strongly, because scent was not always a sign of filth. A room could smell of rosemary, lavender, bay, mint, wormwood, sweet herbs, beeswax, wood smoke, fresh bread, ale, leather, wool, polished wood, perfumed water, soap, or vinegar. Vinegar was used in cooking, cleaning, and household life. It had a sharp smell, but sharpness could feel reassuring. A room that smelled strongly of herbs might not be hiding terrible filth. It might simply be a household attempting to create a pleasant atmosphere with what was available. Think of it as Tudor air freshener. Only instead of a small plug-in device releasing spring meadow, somebody may have scattered herbs, burned scented material, or hung bundles from the rafters. And unlike a modern air freshener, the herbs might also be going into dinner. Efficiency was important. The kitchen was perhaps the great engine room of household smell. Bread, porridge, ale, stew, salt fish, onions, garlic, cheese, roasting meat when a family could afford it, smoke from the fire, grease on tools, ash on the floor, warmth, steam, damp cloth. The kitchen smelled alive. not necessarily clean by modern standards, but not automatically foul. Food smells are complicated. A modern kitchen can smell wonderful while still containing a sink full of dishes that has begun its own small political movement. The Tudor kitchen was no different. A good meal could fill a room with rich smells. A spoiled meal could become dangerous. And food preservation mattered because fresh supplies were seasonal, expensive, or difficult to maintain. Salt, smoke, drying, pickling, and storage were all part of survival. So some smells that seem unpleasant to us were signs of preparation. A smoked fish might smell intense, but it also meant food might last longer. A strong cheese might smell alarming, but it was still food. A barrel of ale might smell yeasty and sour, but it was safer, in many situations, than relying casually on questionable water. In the Tudor home, scent was not just about comfort. It often told you what work was happening. And that may be the fairest way to understand the Tudor house. Not as a dirty little box where people accepted misery. Not as a spotless cottage full of lavender and cheerful linen. But as a living place. A place under constant pressure. A place where every person, object, animal, meal, fire, garment, season, and visitor added another layer. The home could smell clean after washing. Then smoke would drift in. The floor could be swept. Then boots would return from outside. Linen could be aired. Then rain would come. The room could be scented with herbs. Then someone would cook fish. The bedding could be beaten. Then the family dog would decide it had urgent business near the door. This was not failure. This was life before plumbing. And in the next module, we will leave the house and return to the body. Not the glamorous Tudor body seen in royal portraits. The actual body. Hair, beards, teeth, hands, skin, perfume, lice, and the very uncomfortable truth that Tudor people often spent more time grooming than the stink myth allows them to have. Because beneath the smoke, beneath the rushes, beneath the laundry and the chamber pots, there was still vanity, there was still dignity, and there was still the ancient human desire to enter a room and hope nobody notices you first by smell. Now that we have stepped inside the Tudor home, past the smoky fire, the damp bedding, the rushes, the laundry, and the chamber pot with its deeply private opinions, we can finally meet the Tudor person. Not the royal portrait. Not the perfect figure standing in velvet with one hand resting on a sword. The actual person. The person who woke up cold. The person who combed their hair. The person who checked their clothing. The person who washed their hands before eating. The person who worried about breath, appearance, lice, mud, and whether the person sitting beside them at dinner had recently been too close to a goat. Because Tudor people did not walk through life as though they had never noticed their own bodies. They noticed. They cared. They groomed. They cleaned what they could. And sometimes, they probably spent a surprising amount of their morning removing tiny enemies from their hair. The Tudor body was not ignored. It was managed. And that word matters. Managed, not perfected, not made scentless, not polished into the shining, lemon-scented version of humanity promised by modern advertising, but managed, with water in basins, with cloths, with combs, with linen, with herbs, with oils, with toothpicks, with small tools worn on belts, and with the stubborn hope that whatever was crawling in your hair had not yet reached your collar. Let us begin with the hair, because hair was serious business. Hair was visible. Hair could reveal rank, gender, age, religious identity, occupation, and personal care. A person's hair could be covered, braided, curled, cut, shaved, combed, oiled, scented, arranged beneath a cap, or hidden beneath a hat. And even when it was mostly hidden, someone still had to deal with it. The image of the Tudor person with wild, tangled hair and a general air of having slept in a hedge is not entirely impossible. Life was difficult. Weather existed. Manual labor existed. Children existed. But grooming was not unknown. Combs were common enough to appear in archaeological finds and surviving objects. They could be made from wood, bone, ivory, horn, shell, and other available materials. Some were simple. Some were elegant. Some belonged to people with money. Some were made for function rather than display. And their purpose was not just to make someone look nice. A comb could remove dirt. A comb could smooth hair. A comb could distribute oil. A comb could help untangle knots. And most importantly, a comb could remove lice and nits. And yes, lice, the tiny, determined, deeply unwelcome citizens of history. They were not a Tudor invention. They were not a sign that every person was filthy. They were simply part of life in a world of close contact, shared spaces, heavy clothing, limited bathing, crowded households, and no modern insect treatment. You could be clean by Tudor standards and still have lice. You could be wealthy and still have lice. You could own velvet, silverware, a carved bed, several servants, and a portrait so expensive that it made your face look permanently disappointed, and still have something in your hair trying to establish a family. History is very democratic in this one particular way. The comb was not just a beauty tool. It was a small weapon in a long war against insects. Many Tudor combs had fine teeth on one side and wider teeth on the other. The fine teeth could catch lice and their eggs. The wider teeth could groom and style the hair afterward. It was practical. It was direct. It was not glamorous, but it was necessary. A wooden comb might even be treated with oil to help it move more smoothly through the hair. Perfumed oil could leave the hair with a pleasant scent. Other preparations were believed to help repel lice. So the act of combing could include cleaning, pest control, comfort, scent, and appearance all at once. This is one of those details that makes the past feel suddenly less distant. A Tudor person sits near a window. Maybe there is morning light. Maybe someone else in the room is preparing food. Maybe there is smoke in the air. Maybe the house is cold. And there they are, carefully combing through their hair, checking for tiny problems, pulling the comb through again, trying to make themselves respectable before the day begins. It is not heroic. It is not royal. It is not the sort of scene painted onto a palace wall. But it is human. And hair was not merely about cleanliness. It was also about presentation. A man might comb his beard. A woman might arrange her hair beneath a coif, hood, cap, or other head covering. The wealthier could afford more elaborate styles, more decorative materials, and more assistance. The poor had fewer resources, less leisure, and often more physically demanding work. But almost everyone had some reason to make themselves presentable. Because appearance mattered. A clean face mattered. A neat beard mattered. A decent cap mattered. A tidy shirt mattered. These things could affect how others saw you. And Tudor society was intensely interested in how others saw you. Status was everywhere. In clothing, in speech, in posture, in manners, in the fabric you wore, in whether your linen was white, and perhaps in whether your hair suggested you had spent the morning in a domestic argument with a flock of chickens. Now let us move lower, to the face. The face was the part of the body most likely to be washed regularly. Hands and faces could be washed with water from a basin. This was more practical than preparing a full bath. It required less water, less fuel, less time, and fewer people carrying buckets through the house while trying not to trip over the dog. A person might wash before meals. They might wash after work. They might wash after travel. They might wash when receiving visitors. They might wash because manners demanded it. And manners in Tudor England were not a minor concern. Courtesy books gave advice on how to behave at the table. Do not pick your ears while eating. Do not clean your teeth with your fingers. Do not behave as though your body has no rules. These instructions tell us something important. They tell us that people were expected to notice what was clean, what was rude, what was unpleasant, and what should be kept private. A culture does not write manners about personal cleanliness unless personal cleanliness matters. Of course, standards were different. A Tudor person did not have a toothbrush in the modern sense. No neat plastic handle. No bright tube of mint paste. No label promising maximum whitening power. And no electric toothbrush vibrating angrily at 6 in the morning, like a small machine possessed by a dental spirit. But teeth were still cleaned. Food could be removed with toothpicks. Cloths, chewed twig, damp sponges, and abrasive powders could be used. The wealthier might use materials such as salt or other powders. Poorer people might use cheaper abrasives. There were ways to rinse the mouth. There were mixtures involving herbs, wine, vinegar, and other ingredients. Herbs and spices could also be chewed to freshen breath. None of this means Tudor teeth were perfect. They were not. Dental disease existed. Toothache existed. Tooth loss existed. And the Tudor cure for a bad tooth was often much worse than the bad tooth itself. But the myth that nobody cared about their teeth is simply too easy. They cared. They had methods. Some methods were practical. Some were unpleasant. Some probably damaged enamel. Some involved ingredients that would make a modern dentist quietly sit down and stare at the wall. But the desire was there. To have a cleaner mouth. To have fresher breath. To remove food. To avoid embarrassment. Tudor grooming could be surprisingly detailed, but it was also deeply unequal. A wealthy person might own a mirror. Not the clear, flattering, bright mirror we know today. But polished metal mirrors existed, and the richest could have more expensive glass mirrors. A person who could afford a mirror could inspect their face, their hair, their beard, their clothing, their complexion, their jewelry, their collar, their small public identity. But many poorer people did not have mirrors. They still groomed. They still washed. They still combed. They still depended on family, neighbors, habit, touch, and social expectation. But they did not have the luxury of standing before a mirror and deciding whether their hair looked too wild for a formal dinner. For many people, the answer would simply have been, "This is my hair. It has survived the day." We move forward. And then there were the small tools. Tiny personal objects. A toothpick. A nail cleaner. Tweezers. A small scoop for ears. A little tool for trimming nails. These could be attached to a belt or girdle in a personal set. Not everyone owned such a thing. Some were expensive. Some were made of silver or other valuable materials. But their existence gives us another quiet truth. Tudor people had grooming routines. They cleaned under nails. They removed food from teeth. They trimmed nails. They dealt with hair. They cleaned ears. The past was not filled with people who had simply accepted the existence of dirt as a permanent moral condition. They were trying, sometimes with silver tools, sometimes with a bit of cloth, sometimes with a wooden comb, sometimes with nothing, but patience and the deeply understandable wish not to look terrible in front of other people. Now let us talk about scent. Not perfume in the modern sense. Not an elegant glass bottle displayed on a bright store shelf. But scent as protection. Scent as appearance. Scent as comfort. Scent as an attempt to control a world that was always making smells. Tudor people used herbs. Rosemary, lavender, mint, other fragrant plants. Oils could be scented. Hair could be scented. Rooms could be scented. Clothing could be stored with fragrant materials. A small object could carry spice or perfume. Scent had social value. It could signal care. It could signal wealth. It could cover unpleasant smells. And it could offer psychological comfort in a world where people believed foul air might carry illness. This is important. To a Tudor person, a pleasant scent was not only pleasant, it could feel protective. If the world smelled dangerous, then smelling good could feel like a small defense. A fragile one, perhaps. But human beings have always found comfort in fragile defenses. We light candles. We spray rooms. We wash clothes. We open windows. We pretend our problems will leave if the air smells like pine forest. The Tudor person scattered herbs. We buy winter spice room spray. The emotional logic is not so different. But there was another side to appearance. A dangerous side. The Tudor world could be obsessed with complexion. Pale skin could be associated with high status because it suggested that a person did not spend long days laboring outdoors. Cosmetics could be used by people with money. Faces could be whitened. Features could be emphasized. Beauty could become another kind of social armor. But such appearance came with risks. Some substances used in historical cosmetics were harsh. Some were unhealthy. Some could damage skin. And some treatments were less a beauty routine than a slow negotiation between vanity and poison. This is the part where history quietly reminds us that beauty standards have always been willing to make people uncomfortable, anxious, and occasionally ill. The past was not free from vanity. It was simply more dangerous about it. The myth is not that Tudor people smelled wonderful. The myth is that they did not care. They cared. The rich cared because appearance was power. The poor cared because dignity matters even when life is hard. A clean shirt could make someone feel respectable. A combed beard could make someone look prepared. A rinsed mouth could make a meal less embarrassing. A scented oil could make the body feel less exposed. A fresh piece of linen could separate a person from sweat, dust, smoke, and the long day waiting outside. And when people had little control over disease, weather, war, hunger, work, or the behavior of kings, personal grooming was one of the small things they could control. Not completely, never completely, but enough to matter. Imagine a servant preparing for a meal in a large house. Hands washed, hair tucked away, clothing checked, a bit of cloth used to wipe the face. Imagine a merchant preparing to meet a customer. Beard combed, shirt adjusted, breath freshened with herbs. Imagine a woman preparing for church. Hair arranged, cap placed carefully, linen made as clean as possible. Imagine a child resisting hair combing, a parent holding the comb. A small war begins. Some parts of history do not change at all. The Tudor body was not clean in the way modern people understand clean. There were no showers, no deodorant sticks, no washing machines, no disposable tissues, no antibiotics waiting quietly in a cupboard. But there was attention, routine, care, embarrassment, pride, and constant effort. That effort is what the stink myth forgets. It imagines people in the past as passive. But Tudor life was full of small acts of maintenance. Wash your hands, comb your hair, change your linen, clean your nails, rinse your mouth, air your clothes, avoid the lice, avoid the fleas, avoid the smell of the street, avoid the suspicion that comes from looking too poor, too messy, too careless, or too strange. And try, if possible, to make it through the day without your hair becoming a separate political crisis. In the next module, we will enter one of the most dangerous-smelling places in Tudor England. The street, the market, the riverbank, the alley, the place where horses, slaughterhouses, workshops, waste, food, smoke, trade, mud, and human ambition all met in a narrow space. Because the Tudor home could be cleaned, the Tudor body could be groomed. But outside was where the city breathed. And sometimes, it breathed directly into your face. And now, leave the Tudor house behind. Step out through the doorway. Mind the threshold. Mind the mud. Mind the dog. And whatever you do, do not wear your best shoes. Because we are entering Tudor London. Not the London of neat maps and museum models. Not the London of grand palaces, royal processions, and elegant portraits. The living London. The noisy London. The London where a person could smell bread, fish, smoke, horses, leather, wet wool, dung, roasted meat, river water, perfume, mud, onions, ash, and something deeply suspicious. All before breakfast. This is the place where the Tudor stink myth gets its strongest evidence. Because Tudor London could be unpleasant. Very unpleasant. It was crowded. It was growing. It contained workshops, markets, taverns, animals, homes, churches, alleys, warehouses, kitchens, and people carrying out every part of their lives much too close together. And all of those lives produced waste. Human waste, animal waste, food waste, workshop waste, ash, rotting vegetation, spoiled goods, old water, dirty water, water that looked harmless but had made several very bad decisions. But here is the correction. Tudor London was not filthy because nobody cared. It was filthy because too many people, animals, trades, and household systems were trying to survive inside a city that did not have modern sanitation. That is a very different story. There were efforts to clean. There were rules. There were people assigned to remove waste. There were carts. There were workers. There were local officials. There were complaints. And there were probably thousands of ordinary Londoners who had looked at the street outside their door and thought, this is becoming someone else's problem, which, as historians know, is one of the oldest traditions in any city. Imagine London at first light. The sky is pale and gray. A bell rings somewhere in the distance. A shutter opens overhead. A woman leans out from an upper window. A baker has already begun working. A butcher is preparing for the day. A servant carries a bucket. A horse pulls a cart through a narrow lane. A dog wanders with the confidence of an unpaid city official. A child is sent on an errand. Someone curses because the lane is blocked. Someone else curses because they are late. And under all this movement, the city begins to make its morning smell. Smoke first. Always smoke. Then bread. Then animals. Then whetstone. Then human activity. And then the accumulated history of whatever happened in that lane the day before. The streets were not all identical. Some were busier. Some were wealthier. Some were broader. Some were lined with shops and workshops. Some were close to markets. Some were closer to the river. Some were dark and narrow. Some had houses leaning overhead, reducing the strip of sky to a narrow ribbon. Some had drains. Some had gutters. Some had nothing more sophisticated than rainwater and hope. And hope, while emotionally valuable, is not a sewer system. It has never been a sewer system. Tudor London had cleaners. The strange part is that the city still needed them constantly. We sometimes imagine a medieval or Tudor city as a place with no public organization at all, as though every household simply threw things into the street and then waited for history to happen. But London had forms of civic authority. It had rules about nuisance and waste. It had people expected to manage streets and remove filth. Paid scavengers were operating in the city during the Tudor period. Official carts were used to help remove refuse. So the city did not simply accept dirt as a natural decoration. It tried to push it away. The trouble was, there was always more. More ash from fires. More waste from houses. More mud after rain. More animal droppings. More food scraps. More packing materials. More spoiled goods. More people. And every year, as the city became busier, the problem became less like a task and more like a tide. You could sweep a street. You could remove a pile. You could send a cart. You could scold a household. You could fine a trader. And by tomorrow morning, the city would have produced more city. This is why smell in Tudor London was not just one smell. It changed by neighborhood. Near the river, the air could be damp, muddy, and heavy. Near a market, it could carry fish, blood, straw, hides, meat, cooking, manure, and crowds. Near a bakery, it could be warm and inviting. Near a tannery, the invitation would be much less successful. Near a dye workshop, chemical materials could alter the air. Near a churchyard, the ground itself could carry an uncomfortable history. Near a stable, you would know exactly where you were. And then there was Smithfield. Smithfield was a major livestock market. Animals came there for sale. Cattle, pigs, horses, sheep, animals that had traveled a long way. Animals that needed rest. Animals that needed feeding. Animals that had absolutely no interest in the dignity of nearby pedestrians. Smithfield was not a quiet place. It was movement, noise, bellowing, snorting, hooves, mud, handlers, buyers, sellers, and all the smells that come from placing large numbers of farm animals close to a major city. Some animals were sold and then moved toward the city's slaughterhouses. That meant meat, blood, offal, hides, straw, carts, workers, and a great deal of physical labor. The Tudor city did not hide the process that brought food to the table. It lived beside it. You might eat meat at dinner and know that earlier that day, the animal had been alive only a short walk away. Modern people often imagine food arriving in a clean plastic package, already separated from every difficult part of reality. Tudor London did not offer this luxury. The cow was there. The butcher was there. The blood was there. The smell was there. The work was there. And, most importantly, the person responsible for cleaning after it all was there too. The market smelled awful sometimes, but it was also proof that the city was alive. A market is not just a place where things are sold. It is a place where people meet, where news travels, where arguments begin, where food appears, where prices rise, where rumors spread, where a person might hear about a royal marriage, a plague outbreak, a local execution, a ship arriving, a war overseas, or a neighbor doing something embarrassing. Markets were noisy because cities are noisy. They were smelly because food is physical. Fish does not become fish only when it reaches a plate. Meat does not become meat without work. Vegetables rot. Animals leave evidence. People spill things. And London, being London, made all of this happen in crowded spaces. But a fish market was not merely a symbol of filth. It was a food system. A butcher's stall was not merely a nightmare for your nose. It was survival. A brewer's yard was not merely a source of strange smells. It was drink, employment, trade, and tax. The city's odor was often the smell of people working. And that is why the Tudor stink myth is so lazy. It takes every smell and calls it failure. But many of those smells came from labor. Bread being baked, ale being brewed, leather being prepared, wool being worked, cloth being dyed, fish being sold, meat being cut, wood being burned. The city smelled because the city was feeding itself. And now, let us walk toward the river. Not too close, just close enough to understand. The Thames was beautiful. It was wide. It was busy. It carried boats, people, goods, fish, news, fuel, and trade. It connected London to the rest of England and to the wider world. It was the city's great moving road. But it was also under enormous pressure. Without modern sewage systems, waste could seep into the ground, flow through streets, enter tributaries, and reach the river. Some houses close to the water had privies that emptied toward streams or the river. Other waste arrived through smaller watercourses. The River Fleet, once a real river running through London, became increasingly polluted as it passed through the city. And this is where our imagination becomes almost too clear. A riverbank, low tide, mud, rubbish, waste, the remains of trade, the remains of meals, the remains of animals, the remains of all the things a city prefers not to discuss when it is trying to look impressive. The Thames was London's lifeline, and also one of the places where London sent its problems to become everybody else's problem downstream. The people of Tudor London did not fully understand waterborne disease. They feared foul air. They feared stench. They feared corrupted vapors. And in many cases, they were right that something was wrong, but not always right about why. A foul ditch could be dangerous. A rotten smell could signal decay. A filthy riverbank could be a warning. But the deadliest threat could still be invisible. Water could look clear. A cup could look clean. A stream could seem ordinary. And yet illness could arrive. This is one of the cruelest things about life before germ theory. The dangers did not announce themselves clearly. The smell might frighten you. The smell might disgust you. The smell might even make you ill. But the invisible danger could be somewhere else entirely. And so Londoners did what human beings always do when faced with invisible danger. They created rules. They created habits. They created fears. They created remedies. They used herbs. They avoided foul places when possible. They complained. They prayed. They cleaned. They blamed. They tried to make sense of it. And sometimes, unfortunately, they blamed the wrong people. Foreigners, the poor, the sick, the strange, the unlucky. History has many bad smells, but one of the worst is fear looking for someone to punish. There were public privies too. Yes, public toilets. The Tudor city had them. Not modern toilets, obviously. No flush. No tiled walls. No polite little sign telling you to wash your hands. But places where large numbers of people could go. Near Queen Hive, there was a common privy said to have seats for dozens of users. Imagine it. A public facility built for necessity. A practical solution. A communal answer to a deeply private problem. And perhaps for the people waiting their turn. The most important building in London. A palace has a throne. A city has a queue. Still, the presence of privies tells us something vital. People did not believe waste should simply remain wherever it appeared. They knew it had to go somewhere. The problem was that somewhere was often too close to homes, too close to water, too close to streets, too close to gardens, or too close to the person unlucky enough to be carrying the bucket. The technology was not enough. The population was increasing. The city was too dense. And infrastructure, like most things in history, struggled to keep up with ambition. Some of Tudor London's worst smells came not from people living badly, but from people working with materials nobody could make pleasant. Think about workshops, leather workers, dyers, fullers, metal workers, brewers, butchers, people processing animals, cloth, chemicals, metals, food, and fuel. These were useful trades, necessary trades, but pleasant, not always. Leatherworking in particular could involve materials that made the air harsh and memorable. Dyeing cloth involved substances that could stain hands, tools, drains, and nearby water. Fulling cloth required labor and treatments that could leave a distinctive smell. The city's industries did not happen in distant industrial zones, hidden behind safety fences and warning labels. They happened near homes, near streets, near people, near children, near shops, near churches. The Tudor city did not separate work from life. Work was life. You lived beside your trade. You heard it. You smelled it. You carried it home in your clothes. A leather worker may have smelled of leather. A brewer may have smelled of grain and yeast. A butcher may have smelled of blood and fat. A dyer may have had permanently stained fingers. And when they came home at night, they did not step through a sterile office lobby and leave the day behind. They brought the day with them. That is another reason the myth fails. It imagined smell as personal laziness. But much of the smell was occupational. It belonged to the work. It belonged to the city. It belonged to the world around them. A person could wash hands. They could comb hair. They could change linen. They could carry herbs. But they could not remove the entire city from the air. And yet, Tudor London was not only smoke and sewage. That part is important. There were gardens. There were herb plots. There were trees. There were open spaces beyond crowded streets. There were flowers. There were food gardens. There were fields surprisingly close to parts of the growing city. There were birds. There were animals. There were moments when the wind shifted. And suddenly, for a little while, the city smelled almost gentle. A breeze from the river, fresh-cut herbs, spring rain, bread, fruit, would smoke in cold weather, flowers near a garden wall, the smell of a clean shirt after washing, the brief relief of open air after a crowded room. These things mattered because life was not one long misery. It was contrast. A person noticed fresh air because bad air existed. A person valued clean water because dirty water existed. A person loved a scented room because the street outside had been difficult. And a person with a clean collar might have felt as proud as a king. So yes, Tudor London could smell terrible. There were lanes you would not want to enter, markets that would challenge your courage, riverside spaces you would not want near your shoes, workshops that would make your eyes water, stables that would make your nose surrender, and streets where a sudden rainstorm could transform everything on the ground into something with opinions. But no, it was not a city where people had given up. It was a city fighting against its own size. A city cleaning what it could, removing what it could, hiding what it could, scenting what it could, and still waking every morning to discover that hundreds of thousands of people, animals, fires, meals, carts, and trades had created another day's worth of problems. In the next module, we will turn away from the street and enter the grander world. The palaces, the courts, the royal chambers, the enormous kitchens, the perfumed rooms, the servants carrying linens, hot water, flowers, food, and chamber pots through the private universe of the Tudor elite. Because the wealthy could escape some smells, they could cover others. They could buy more comfort. They could hire more labor. But even kings and queens, even behind velvet curtains and polished walls, could not escape being human. Leave the London street behind. Leave the horses. Leave the market fish. Leave the alleyway that has been quietly collecting rainwater, mud, ash, and personal tragedy since yesterday afternoon. Now walk toward the palace. The gates are taller. The walls are stronger. The windows are grander. The rooms are warmer. The linen is whiter. The perfume is more expensive. And the number of people carrying chamber pots is significantly higher. Welcome to the Tudor court. A place of velvet, ceremony, tapestries, gold, music, political danger, roasted meat, fresh linen, carefully arranged beards, enormous fireplaces, servants, spies, nobles, priests, guards, musicians, cooks, messengers, dogs, hawks, and kings who could change the shape of your life with one irritated sentence. At first glance, the palace seems like the opposite of the crowded city. It has more space, more servants, more water, more clean fabric, more food, more perfume, more fireplaces, more rooms where a person can quietly recover from an unfortunate encounter with a nobleman's hunting dog. But the palace was not a modern hotel. It was not a silent place of polished marble and invisible staff. It was a working machine, a vast human machine, and every part of it smelled. A Tudor palace did not defeat smell. It simply had more money to negotiate with it. That was the great privilege of the royal court. The king did not need to fetch water. The queen did not need to scrub linen. A noble visitor did not need to empty a chamber pot. Someone else did those things. Someone else carried the water. Someone else heated it. Someone else washed the cloth. Someone else swept the floor. Someone else brought flowers. Someone else scrubbed the bowls. Someone else managed the food. Someone else removed the evidence of dinner. Someone else made the royal body appear clean, calm, and almost untouched by ordinary human life. The crown was magnificent. The laundry system was doing most of the actual work. Imagine Hampton Court Palace in the reign of Henry VIII. The palace is busy before sunrise. In the kitchens, fires are already burning. Servants are moving through corridors. Food is being prepared. Water is carried. Bread is baked. Meat is roasted. Rooms are opened. Floors are swept. Linen is handled. Messages are delivered. The king's household is waking. And with it comes the first great truth of palace life. A palace is not one household. It is a small city wearing expensive clothing. Hundreds of people could be present at court. Courtiers, servants, officials, guards, cooks, grooms, messengers, ladies-in-waiting, musicians, clergy, visitors, petitioners, people hoping for royal favor, people afraid of losing royal favor, people pretending to be calm while their entire future depends on whether the king smiles at them before dinner. All of them ate. All of them slept. All of them sweated. All of them wore clothing. All of them produced laundry. And all of them needed, eventually, to visit a privy. This is why the palace could be luxurious and still deeply physical. A tapestry could cover a wall. A silver bowl could sit on a table. Perfume could drift through a private chamber. But beneath the silk and ceremony were bodies. Bodies with stomachs. Bodies with hair. Bodies with dirty hands. Bodies that caught illness. Bodies that needed washing. Bodies that required food, sleep, warmth, privacy, and occasionally a person whose official duty involved assisting a king with the least glamorous task imaginable. Some of the most powerful men in Henry VIII court became powerful partly because they helped him wash and dress. This sounds strange to modern ears. We imagine political power as speeches, armies, documents, parliaments, treaties, and secret meetings in candlelit rooms. And Tudor court politics had all of those things. But it also had access. Access to the king. Access to the private rooms. Access to the moment before he was dressed. Access to the moment after he woke. Access to his moods. Access to his complaints. Access to the people he wanted to see. And the people he did not. Henry VIII Privy Chamber was close to him in every possible sense. Its attendants could wash and dress him. They could help manage his private routines. They attended him even when he used the close stool. The close stool was, in simple terms, a chair built around a chamber pot. A throne, perhaps, but one with a much more urgent purpose. The royal court had many places to seek power. The Privy Chamber was not always the most poetic, but it was certainly close to the source. And this is one of the most useful lessons from Tudor history. Privacy was power. The more private the room, the closer it was to the king. The closer you were to the king, the more likely your voice could be heard. A courtier might wait in a public hall. Another might gain entry to a more private chamber. Another might enter the king's personal space. And a very small number might be trusted with tasks so intimate that they saw the monarch when he was tired, unwell, irritated, or simply human. In a world where the king's decision could change marriages, fortunes, land, religion, and survival, knowing whether he had slept badly mattered. But let us not imagine Henry VIII waking alone in a perfectly scented room, stepping into a private marble bath, and emerging 3 hours later like a polished statue. He had access to luxury. He had a private bathroom at Hampton Court. He had servants. He had rich cloth. He had scented items. He had enough resources to turn comfort into a political statement. But bathing was still labor-intensive. Water had to be brought. Water had to be heated. Tubs had to be prepared. Cloths had to be washed. Rooms had to be kept in order. And large Tudor buildings, however grand, still had smoke, fire, damp weather, animals, kitchens, wool, leather, crowded servants' quarters, and 1,000 opportunities for scent to become difficult. The difference was not that the king lived in a world without smells. The difference was that the king had an army of people trying to make the smells less royal. Think of the palace laundry. A royal household required immense amounts of fabric. Shirts, shifts, sheets, tablecloths, napkins, towels, curtains, bed hangings, underclothes, servants' garments, cloths for cleaning, cloths for dining, cloths for handling food, cloths for hiding the fact that a room had been used by hundreds of people with varying levels of care. And white linen mattered. It was visible proof of order. A clean piece of linen suggested that a household had money, staff, water, fuel, storage, and discipline. It was not simply cloth. It was reputation. A dirty cuff could be embarrassing. A stained tablecloth could be noticed. A badly kept chamber could suggest disorder. And disorder at court was never merely untidy. Disorder could become a political statement. If you could not manage a room, could you manage an office? If your servants looked careless, were you careless? If your clothing appeared neglected, had you fallen from favor? Tudor people did not live in a culture where every individual was free to dress however they pleased without consequence. Appearance could announce rank before you opened your mouth. And clean linen was one of the quietest and strongest ways to do it. The young Edward VI's household treated cleanliness with almost military seriousness. Edward VI became king as a child. A child king was not simply a child. He was the body through which the kingdom continued. His health mattered. His appearance mattered. His safety mattered. The people around him took this very seriously. New clothes could be washed, dried by the fire, and treated with perfume before he wore them. A wash house was ordered. Walls, floors, and ceilings in his rooms were repeatedly washed down. Objects he might touch were washed. This was not modern germ theory. It was not scientific sterilization in the way we understand it, but it was a powerful expression of concern. The royal child was not to be exposed casually to dirt, disorder, bad air, careless servants, or the normal physical untidiness of life. The court wanted him protected, clean, controlled, separated from risk. Of course, no amount of washing could fully protect a Tudor monarch from Tudor medicine, Tudor disease, Tudor politics, or Tudor adulthood. The palace could wash walls. It could perfume garments. It could clean objects. It could prepare rooms. But it could not remove danger from the world. And the Tudor world was very good at finding danger. Now follow the servants downstairs, away from the royal rooms, away from tapestries and polished chambers, away from perfume, toward the kitchens, the great kitchens. the beating heart of the palace. This is where the idea of a perfectly clean royal world begins to collapse under the weight of roasted meat. At Hampton Court, the kitchens operated on an astonishing scale. Food was stored, prepared, baked, boiled, roasted, carried, served. The court could include hundreds of people. Meals were produced in enormous quantities. There were specialized spaces for different tasks: baking, meat preparation, storage, spices, sweets, and a great fire large enough to make the modern kitchen oven look like it is hiding from responsibility. It was not a kitchen. It was a food factory with better hats. Imagine the heat, the smoke, the fat, the steam, the smell of roasting meat, the smell of fish in storage, the smell of ale, the smell of bread, the sharpness of herbs and spices, the ash underfoot, the sweat of servants working near open fire, the damp cloths, the wood, the smoke caught in hair and sleeves. A royal kitchen could feed a court. It could impress visitors. It could display wealth. But it could not pretend to smell like roses. And nobody expected it to. It smelled like work, like heat, like food, like danger, like the inside of a place where fires had to burn constantly because hundreds of mouths were waiting. And then there was the route from kitchen to table. Food traveled, plates traveled, jugs traveled, servants traveled. People moved quickly through corridors with trays, bowls, meat, bread, and drink. The palace did not run on elegance alone. It ran on people carrying heavy things. Every feast required labor. Every grand dinner required someone to prepare the room, clean the vessels, manage the fire, cut the food, carry the dishes, remove the remains, wash the cloth, and clean up after the people who had spent the evening discussing power while chewing. The magnificence of the Tudor court rested on thousands of invisible chores. This is why palace life could be beautiful and exhausting at the same time. A courtier might see glittering rooms. A servant might see heavy buckets. A noble might see a feast. A kitchen worker might see grease, smoke, heat, knives, ash, and another meal arriving before the last one was fully cleared. A queen might see a scented private chamber. A laundress might see mountains of linen. A king might see luxury. A cleaner might see a floor that needed sweeping again. And we should pause here for another myth. The myth that perfume means cleanliness. It does not. Perfume can accompany cleanliness. It can make a person feel fresh. It can add pleasure. It can signal wealth. But perfume can also cover smells. It can compete with smells. It can join smells. And in a Tudor palace, it often did all three. Rose water, herbs, spices, scented oils, fragrant materials, flowers in rooms, perfumed garments. These could make a chamber feel refined. But a palace was still full of smoke from fires, food from kitchens, wax from candles, bodies in clothing, animals in courtyards, wet weather, and the long daily movement of people through enclosed spaces. The palace did not smell like one thing. It smelled expensive. That is not the same thing. It may have smelled of roses, but roses beside roast beef, roses beside candle wax, roses beside damp wool, roses beside dogs, roses beside a courtier who had been wearing velvet all day and did not have access to modern deodorant. Luxury is often just a better-smelling argument with reality. Now, let us talk about the palace privy. not the royal close stool inside private rooms. The wider system. Palaces had garderobes and privies. They had arrangements for waste. Some were placed in projecting structures where waste could fall away from the building, often toward moats or ditches. This may sound barbaric, and by modern standards, it was extremely limited. But it was an attempt at design. It was a recognition that waste needed to be separated from living rooms, sleeping rooms, eating spaces, and ceremonial spaces. The palace could not solve the problem perfectly. No Tudor building could, but it could build around it, push it away, hide it, manage it, place it at the edge. This, in a very simple way, is the entire history of sanitation. Human beings spend thousands of years trying to convince waste to go somewhere else. And then there were the people who had to maintain all this. Servants were everywhere. Not decorative servants. Working servants. People who carried water. People who lit fires. People who emptied pots. People who cleaned rooms. People who prepared beds. People who washed clothing. People who scrubbed dishes. People who maintained kitchens. People who moved waste. People who did the physical work that allowed royalty to look distant from ordinary life. The palace was cleanest where servants could make it clean. The palace was freshest where servants could air it. The palace was most orderly where servants had enough time and supplies to maintain it. And that is why courtly hygiene was also a story about inequality. The king could smell pleasant because someone else handled the unpleasantness. Even at court, cleanliness was never permanent. It had to be rebuilt every day. A room could be swept in the morning. Then people entered. A bed could be made. Then someone slept in it. A shirt could be washed. Then someone wore it. A floor could be cleaned. Then muddy shoes arrived. A chamber could be scented. Then a fire burned. A feast could begin beautifully. Then food, drink, dogs, servants, heat, candle smoke, spilled ale, and human behavior took over. Cleanliness was not a finished condition. It was maintenance. It was repeated labor. It was a daily battle against the simple fact that human beings use rooms. And Tudor palaces used rooms on a spectacular scale. So did royal people smell better than everyone else. Perhaps often, they had more access to clean linen, more access to bathing arrangements, more access to perfume, more servants, more time, more privacy, more wealth. But they also lived in large, busy, crowded households. They wore layers of heavy fabric. They spent time near fires. They attended feasts. They traveled. They hunted. They danced. They slept in rooms that needed constant attention. They ate food prepared in enormous kitchens. They lived inside a world of horses, dogs, leather, wool, smoke, wax, food, and people. So the palace did not remove the Tudor world. It gathered the Tudor world into one beautiful, dangerous, heavily managed place. And in the next module, we will move beyond the palace gates, into the roads, the inns, the coaches, the muddy tracks, the crowded lodging houses, the strange and difficult business of traveling through Tudor England without arriving at your destination, looking, smelling, and feeling like you had lost a long argument with the weather. Because if cleanliness was hard at home and difficult in the city, then travel was where the entire problem climbed onto a horse. And now, we leave the palace. The gates close behind us. The perfume fades. The polished rooms disappear. The servants return to their laundry. And ahead of us lies the Tudor road. Or more accurately, a stretch of earth that has been walked on, ridden over, driven across, rained upon, frozen, softened, churned, ignored, repaired badly, and then thoroughly ruined again by the next passing cart. This is the road through Tudor England. A road that could take you to a market, to a wedding, to a monastery, to a relative's house, to court, to prison, to a battlefield, to a new job, to a new husband or wife, to a funeral, or, if you were unlucky, to an inn where the bed contained more life than the village churchyard. We often imagine the Tudor period as an age when people hardly traveled. Everyone stayed in one village. Everyone knew everybody. Nobody went anywhere unless a king sent a horse, a soldier, or a plague arrived. But this is another easy myth. People traveled. Merchants traveled. Pilgrims traveled. Soldiers traveled. Servants traveled. Craft workers traveled. Students traveled. Messengers traveled. People moved for work. People moved for marriage. People moved because they had debts. People moved because they had opportunities. People moved because they had made a mistake in one town and urgently needed to become someone else in another. Human mobility did not begin when somebody invented the railway timetable. It just became less muddy. But Tudor travel was not easy. It was slow. It was physical. It was uncertain. And it had a special talent for making you smell like every place you had passed through. A journey in Tudor England was not a relaxing escape. It was a long conversation between your body, the weather, and a road that did not care about your plans. Imagine you are leaving London. You have a bag. Perhaps you have food. Perhaps you have money carefully tied away. Perhaps you have a change of linen if you are fortunate. Perhaps you have a horse if you are wealthy. Perhaps you have only your feet if you are not. The city is behind you. The air changes slowly. The streets become less crowded. The buildings thin out. You pass gardens, fields, small settlements, roadside inns, hedges, streams, farm animals, and then the road begins to tell you what kind of day you are going to have. If it has been dry, you may face dust. Dust in your shoes, dust on your cloak, dust in your hair, dust settling politely into every fold of your clothing as though it has been invited. If it has rained, the road becomes mud. Deep mud, sticky mud, mud that grabs at boots, mud that slows wheels, mud that coats horses, mud that makes a short journey longer, and mud that has been mixed with everything else a road collects. Not every road was terrible. That is important. There were important routes. There were bridges. There were ferries. There were stretches maintained by local communities. There were well-used paths between towns. There were rivers that could make travel easier. There were coastal journeys. There were routes known by merchants, messengers, and people who had spent their lives moving from place to place. But road quality could vary dramatically. A good road in summer could become miserable after heavy rain. A path that seemed manageable for a rider might be terrible for a cart. A stream that could be crossed in warm weather might become dangerous after a storm. And a traveler who believed they would arrive by sunset could discover that sunset had other ideas. The greatest enemy of Tudor travel was not always the thief in the bushes. Sometimes it was simply a wheel. A wheel could crack. A cart could become stuck. A horse could lose a shoe. A harness could fail. A bridge could be damaged. A river crossing could be impossible. A road could vanish beneath water. A traveler could twist an ankle. A horse could become tired. A child could begin crying. A servant could fall ill. A bag could disappear. And suddenly, the grand journey becomes a long, wet afternoon beside a broken cart. The Tudor equivalent of a delayed connection. Only with more mud, fewer apologies, and no customer service desk. For the wealthier traveler, a horse was often the most practical answer. Horseback travel was faster than walking. It gave you more range. It made it easier to carry some baggage. It also announced status. A good horse was expensive. It needed feed. It needed care. It needed shoes. It needed rest. And it had a very firm opinion about where it wished to place its droppings. A rider could cover distance more efficiently than a person on foot. But riding was not effortless. Hours in the saddle were tiring. Rain-soaked clothing. Cold entered through gloves and boots. The rider's body became stiff. The horse became tired. And all that expensive clothing had to survive dust, mud, rain, sweat, leather, animal hair, and the possibility that your horse would decide to rub itself against a hedge. Now imagine traveling on foot. For poorer people, walking was often the main option. The road became more intimate. Every stone mattered. Every puddle mattered. Every wet patch mattered. Every hill had a personal opinion. A traveler on foot carried what they could. Food, tools, clothing, a message, a small item for sale. Perhaps a child, perhaps grief, perhaps hope. Walking was slow, but it was not passive. People on foot knew roads deeply. They knew shortcuts. They knew where water could be found. They knew which towns had markets. They knew which bridges were unsafe. They knew which places offered shelter. They knew which roads were good for travel and which roads were good only for regret. And there were dangers. Thieves did exist. A traveler alone could be vulnerable. The poor, the hungry, the desperate, and the criminal could all be found on the roads. But the road was not a constant theatrical ambush. Most travelers did not spend every mile fighting masked bandits under moonlight. Most of the time, the road was slower than that, colder than that, more ordinary than that. You worried about weather. You worried about food. You worried about finding somewhere to sleep. You worried about your horse. You worried about money. You worried about getting lost. And perhaps quietly, you worried about meeting someone who recognized you from the last town. The Tudor Road was dangerous because it was uncertain. Not because every tree hid a thief. Not because every innkeeper was plotting murder. Not because every bridge collapsed. But because there were few guarantees. Travel was a test of preparation. And preparation depended on wealth. A wealthy person could hire servants, bring spare clothing, travel with companions, use horses, pay for lodging, carry food, send messages ahead, use known routes, stay with friends or fellow members of their social class. A poorer traveler had fewer protections. They might walk. They might carry everything. They might sleep in simpler conditions. They might depend on charity, work, family, or chance. And if rain came for everyone. But rain punished poverty more efficiently. Let us stop at an inn. The Tudor Inn. A place of shelter, food, drink, gossip, animals, merchants, travelers, workers, strangers, and beds that asked you to be emotionally flexible. An inn could be a welcome sight. After hours on the road, after dust or rain, after wind and mud, the sight of a building offering warmth and food could feel almost miraculous. There might be a fire. There might be ale. There might be stew. There might be bread. There might be a stable for the horse. There might be other travelers with news. There might be a place to sit. And there might be a bed. Perhaps. But an inn was not a private hotel room. It was often busy. It could be crowded. You might share space. You might share a room. You might hear people talking late into the night. You might smell smoke, ale, wet wool, horse leather, food, and many people who had been traveling for several days. The bed might have linen. It might have blankets. It might have straw. It might have fleas. It might have all of these things at once. The Tudor Inn offered hospitality and an educational relationship with insects. And yet inns mattered. They connected places. They gave merchants somewhere to stop. They gave travelers food and information. They provided stables. They created meeting points. They allowed news to move faster than ordinary people could. An innkeeper might hear about a royal procession before a village saw it. A merchant might bring news from London. A messenger might carry information from court. A soldier might speak of war. A traveler might bring rumors of plague. A local person might learn what grain prices were doing in another town. The road did not just carry people. It carried stories. Tudor travel was one of the fastest ways for rumor to become reality. In a world without newspapers arriving every morning, people learned from travelers. They learned from merchants, from carriers, from servants, from priests, from messengers, from sailors, from soldiers, from relatives returning home. A story could move from London to a village by passing through several mouths. It could change along the way. It could become larger, stranger, more frightening, more flattering, more useful. By the time it arrived, the king may have been dying, marrying, invading France, closing monasteries, opening monasteries, fighting the Pope, fighting Spain, or secretly turning into something with horns. The last one was unlikely, but rumor has never required an invitation from reality. For a Tudor ruler, travel had a special meaning. A monarch did not travel merely for scenery. A royal progress was performance. It was power in motion. The king or queen appeared before people who might never otherwise see them. The court arrived. Horses arrived. Servants arrived. Clothing arrived. Food arrived. Officials arrived. Music arrived. Security arrived. And suddenly, a local town or noble household had to receive not simply a visitor, but the state. To host the monarch could be an honor. It could also be expensive. Very expensive. A noble family might need to provide rooms, food, entertainment, staff, space for horses, space for servants, space for goods, space for officials, and somewhere, somehow, an answer to the question every large traveling household eventually creates. Where exactly is everyone going to sleep? A royal progress could bring prestige, but it could also bring strain. The king's presence was a gift, a political opportunity, a public display, a chance to prove loyalty, and also a very large group of people who all needed dinner. Nothing says royal favor quite like discovering you have been chosen to feed several hundred hungry strangers in velvet. royal progresses also had practical reasons. Palaces needed cleaning. Buildings needed repair. A large court produced smoke, waste, laundry, worn rooms, exhausted servants, and enormous pressure on supplies. Moving the court allowed other places to receive attention. It let the monarch be seen. It allowed politics to happen outside London. It spread royal authority into the countryside. But for the ordinary people watching from the roadside, the event might feel almost unreal. A procession, fine horses, banners, rich fabric, armed guards, music, officials, a king, a queen, a moving world of privilege passing through a village where most people owned only a small part of what they saw. And then, after the procession had passed, the road remained, the mud remained, the hoofprints remained, the empty fields remained. The villagers returned to work. The palace was still far away. For ordinary travelers, one of the greatest problems was staying clean. A person could begin a journey in clean linen. Hair combed, hands washed, clothing brushed, a little scent perhaps. Then the road happened. Dust settled, rain fell, a horse sweated, a cart splashed mud. An in-bed introduced you to its insect population. Your cloak absorbed smoke from the fire. Your boots collected dirt. Your hands touched reins, saddles, food, doors, coins, tools, and whatever else the day demanded. By the time you arrived, freshness had become a memory. Tudor travel did not make a person filthy because they were careless. It made them filthy because the journey itself was made of dirt. This is why clean linen mattered so much. A traveler might not be able to wash fully on the road, but they could change an underlayer if they had one. They could wash hands and face. They could comb hair. They could shake out clothing. They could air garments near a fire. They could use scented herbs or water. They could do what people have always done after travel. Try to look as though the road did not defeat them. Imagine arriving at a relative's house. You are tired. Your boots are muddy. Your cloak is damp. Your hair has lost the argument. Your horse smells like a horse because it is a horse and has never apologized for this. But before entering, you pause. You wipe your boots. You brush your clothing. You wash your hands. You adjust your collar. You comb your hair. You become, once again, a person acceptable for society. That small ritual tells us everything. The Tudors knew travel made people dirty. They also knew people wanted to arrive respectably. The road changed your appearance, but it did not remove your desire for dignity. And there was another way to travel. By water. Rivers and coastal routes could move people and goods in ways roads could not. A boat avoided mud. It avoided broken wheels. It avoided certain kinds of exhaustion. It also introduced new problems. Wind, weather, leaks, cold, crowding, seasickness, and the uncomfortable possibility that the person beside you had decided that the side of the boat was the correct place to lose their breakfast. The sea has always been beautiful from the shore, but water travel could be useful. London's river connections mattered enormously. Boats carried goods, passengers, messages, food, building materials, fuel, and people who preferred the uncertainties of water to the certainty of mud. For the wealthy, a barge could be comfortable. For others, a smaller boat might be practical but far less elegant. Either way, the journey still left its mark. River wind entered clothing. Damp settled into fabric. Wood smoke mixed with water. Hair became difficult. And somewhere nearby, someone was always trying to keep food from becoming wet. So, what did Tudor travel smell like? It smelled of wet wool, leather, horse sweat, mud, wood smoke, ale, road dust, river water, hay, grease from wagon wheels, food carried in bags, damp cloaks, stable straw, and the hopeful scent of herbs rubbed into hands before meeting someone important. It smelled like motion, like effort, like the body crossing distance. And perhaps that is why the road matters so much to our story. The Tudor stink myth imagines history standing still. A village of dirty people. A city of dirty people. A palace of rich people who somehow smell like perfume forever. But real Tudor England moved. People went places. They worked. They traded. They visited. They fled. They served. They carried messages. They sought opportunity. They followed kings. They crossed rivers. They entered inns. They arrived tired. They washed their hands. They changed linen where they could. And then they continued. In the next module, we will enter the world of Tudor food. Not the grand banquet first. Not the king's table. The ordinary table. Bread, ale, porridge, meat when possible, fish on fasting days, onions, cheese, milk, gardens, storage rooms, and the uncomfortable truth that what people ate could shape not only their health, but the way their homes, bodies, kitchens, streets, and entire towns smelled. Because before perfume, before soap, before clean linen, there was dinner. Tonight, we arrive at the Tudor table. Not the king's table. Not yet. Not a table buried beneath peacocks, silver plates, and enough roasted meat to make a small village nervous. We are beginning with the ordinary table. The table where life was measured in bread. The table where a pot hung over the fire. The table where onions, herbs, grains, vegetables, cheese, and whatever the household could afford became the difference between a long day and a longer one. Because one of the biggest lies about Tudor England is not only that everyone smelled terrible, it is that everyone ate terribly. That Tudor people either lived on giant feasts of meat and wine, or spent every day chewing a single stale crust in a dark room. Neither picture is quite right. Most Tudor meals were not glamorous, but they were not empty either. They were practical, seasonal, unequal, sometimes comforting, sometimes repetitive, sometimes rich with vegetables and grain, sometimes desperately thin, and always shaped by the most important question in pre-modern life. What can this household actually afford to eat today? Imagine a small Tudor home near evening. The fire is low but still alive. A pot hangs above it. Something is simmering. Perhaps oats, perhaps barley, perhaps peas, perhaps beans, perhaps cabbage, perhaps leeks, perhaps onions, perhaps greens gathered from a garden, perhaps a little bacon or meat if the household has some, perhaps no meat at all. The smell is thick, earthy, warm, not elegant, not expensive, but real. This is pottage, or rather, one version of pottage, because pottage was not one exact recipe. It was a method, a large pot, A slow fire. Ingredients added according to season, household income, garden space, local markets, luck, religious custom, and whether someone had managed to bring home something more interesting than another turnip. Pottage could be thick or thin. It could contain grain, vegetables, pulses, herbs, broth, milk, meat stock, small pieces of meat, or no meat at all. It could feed several people. It could stretch food. It could simmer while work continued around it. And it could make a home smell like supper for hours, which in a cold house after a long day was not a small thing. The smell of pottage was not the smell of poverty alone. It was the smell of a household trying to keep going. Now, this is where the glamorous Tudor myth fails. People like to imagine Tudor food as endless roast meat. Henry VIII at a table, a boar's head, a great pie, a silver cup, a man with a knife looking pleased with himself. And yes, wealthy feasts could be astonishing. But for most people most days, food was not theatrical. Food was bread. Food was porridge. Food was cheese. Food was ale or small beer. Food was vegetables. Food was beans. Food was onions. Food was whatever grew, whatever stored, whatever could be traded, whatever survived the winter, and whatever did not vanish before the children had eaten, which is the ancient household rule of all civilization. The food belongs to everyone, until someone notices the last piece. Bread was central. Bread was not merely something beside the meal. For many people, bread was the meal. It could be eaten fresh. It could be carried. It could be dipped into broth. It could be served with cheese. It could be used with thick dishes. It could become stale and then be used in another form. Nothing was casually wasted when food was expensive. Different breads reflected different grains, local conditions, and household means. Wheat bread could be prized. Rye, barley, oats, and mixed grains could all matter. Some households had lighter, finer bread. Others had darker, coarser bread. But the simple distinction between rich white bread and poor brown bread can become too neat. Real life was more complicated. Regions differed. Harvests differed. Prices differed. And a family's bread could change depending on the season, the year, and whether the harvest had been generous or cruel. The smell of bread could mean comfort, but a shortage of grain could turn an entire year frightening. In Tudor England, harvests mattered with terrifying force. A bad harvest was not an inconvenience. It was not a disappointing year for the local bakery. It could mean rising prices, smaller meals, less choice, hard decisions, more debt, more hunger, and for people already living close to the edge, a change in the grain supply could reshape daily life almost immediately. This is why bread mattered emotionally. A loaf was not simply food. It was security. A full basket of bread could make a household feel safe for one more day. A nearly empty basket could make the whole house quieter. And so the Tudor kitchen had its rhythms. Grain was ground. Dough was mixed. Bread was baked at home or obtained from bakers. The smell of baking could move through a street. Warm bread, wood smoke, flour dust, hot crust, a smell so ordinary that we often forget how powerful it is. But imagine living in a world where fresh bread was never guaranteed. Then the smell becomes something else. It becomes relief. Now, what did people eat with bread? That depended. Always. That depended. A household with a garden might have herbs and vegetables. Cabbage, leeks, onions, garlic, peas, beans, turnips, parsnips, greens, apples when available, berries in season, roots pulled from the soil, leaves cut from the garden. A rich household might enjoy more spices, more meat, more sugar, more imported food, and more variety. A poor household relied more heavily on local produce, grains, and whatever could be grown, gathered, preserved, or bought cheaply. But even this needs care. The poor were not all eating the same food. The rich were not all eating the same food. Coastal communities had more access to fish. Farming households had different possibilities from urban laborers. A family with a cow, a garden, or a reliable employer lived differently from a family with none of these things. Tudor food was not one menu. It was a map of inequality. And that map could be smelled. A prosperous kitchen might smell of roasting meat, spices, wine, butter, sweet dishes, and expensive ingredients brought from far away. A modest kitchen might smell of pottage, onions, bread, cheese, smoke, and damp vegetables waiting in storage. A fishing community might carry the sharp scent of salted or smoked fish. A dairy household might smell of milk, butter, cheese, and the animals that made all of those things possible. A brewer's household might smell of grain, yeast, steam, and wet wood. Food was not hidden away in sealed packages. It was visible, physical, alive, sometimes very recently alive. Let us pause at the dairy. Because cheese, butter, milk, and curds were important parts of many diets. A cow was not merely an animal. It could be a household's moving source of food. Milk could become butter. Butter could be stored more easily than fresh milk. Milk could become cheese. Cheese could travel. Cheese could sit beside bread. Cheese could provide a meal when meat was unavailable. And cheese, as humanity has repeatedly discovered, has its own very confident aroma. A Tudor cheese did not ask to be understood. It asked to be eaten. Then there was meat. Meat mattered. It was valued. It could signal wealth. It could make a feast feel like a feast. But it was not an endless daily supply for every household. Fresh meat did not simply wait in a refrigerator. There was no refrigerator. There was only time. Weather, salt, smoke, storage, and the constant fear that food might spoil before it could be eaten. Meat might be salted, smoked, dried, cooked in pies, prepared in stews, used in stock, used carefully. A small amount could flavor a larger pot. Bones could go into broth. Fat could be valuable. Nothing needed to be wasted if it could still become food. And this is where our modern imagination can become unfair. We sometimes hear salted meat or smoked fish and assume Tudor people must have eaten food that was constantly rotten. But preserving food was a skill. Salt, smoke, drying, and pickling were not signs that people had given up. They were attempts to extend the life of food in a world without refrigeration. The result could be strong smelling, very strong smelling. But strong smell did not automatically mean ruined food. It could mean preservation. It could mean winter preparation. It could mean a household trying to make the harvest last. The Tudor table was shaped by religion as well as hunger. For much of the period, religious rules influenced what people could eat on particular days. Fish mattered. Fasting traditions mattered. The calendar mattered. And even after England's religious upheavals, Old habits and rules did not simply vanish from every table overnight. Food was connected to faith, to identity, to law, to custom, to the rhythm of the year. A meal could tell you what season it was, what day it was, what household you were in, what faith they followed, and what they could afford. A bowl of fish might be ordinary in one setting, necessary in another, a luxury in another, and deeply disappointing in a household that had hoped for meat. History is full of great religious arguments. Many of them eventually arrive at dinner. Now let us talk about drink, because another Tudor myth says that everyone drank ale all day because water was impossible to drink. This needs a little care. Ale and beer were important parts of Tudor life. They were made in homes and by brewers. They were served at meals. They could vary in strength. They provided calories. They were part of social life. But this does not mean every person was wandering through the day in a permanent fog of drunkenness. Nor does it mean nobody drank water. People did drink water. They used wells, springs, streams, and other sources. The problem was not that water had been banned by history. The problem was that water quality could vary. Some sources were better than others. Some were dangerous. Some were unpleasant. And people did not yet understand invisible contamination. So drink like food depended on place, on wealth, on access, on season, on local custom, and on whether the nearest water source had recently been treated with the respect it deserved. Ale could be weak or stronger. It could be made at home. It could be bought. It could be part of wages or hospitality. And brewing created its own smell. Grain soaking, mashing, heating, steam, yeast, wood smoke, wet floors, barrels, the warm, sour, grain-heavy scent of a process that turned crops into drink. For a Tudor household, brewing was not merely a hobby. It was useful labor. And in towns, brewing could become serious business. Imagine walking past a brewing place. You smell malt. You smell wet grain. You smell yeast. You smell fire. You smell the sharp warmth of fermentation. It is not perfume, but it is not decay either. It is food becoming drink. It is work becoming wages. It is grain becoming a reason for people to gather around a table and talk too loudly. Tudor people did not use forks in the way modern diners do, but that does not mean meals were manners-free chaos. At the table, hands mattered. Knives mattered. Spoons mattered. And washing hands mattered. People were expected to behave properly, to cut food carefully, to avoid disgusting habits, to respect shared dishes, to avoid turning a meal into a public display of every thought that had ever entered their mouth. Forks existed in some places and kitchens, but they were not routine table tools for most English diners in the Tudor period. This does not mean everyone grabbed food like a starving wolf at a feast. There were manners, quite a lot of them. Hands were washed before eating. Food could be cut with knives. Spoons were used. Etiquette manuals gave warnings about behavior that no civilized person should need explained. Do not wipe your nose on the tablecloth. Do not pick your teeth with your knife. Do not chew with your mouth open. And, perhaps most importantly, do not use your fingers in ways that make everyone else lose faith in humanity. The existence of such rules tells us something very useful. Tudor meals were not simply about filling the body. They were social occasions. They were performances of status. They were family rituals. They were moments when people watched one another. A clean hand mattered. A clean cloth mattered. A neat table mattered. And if you were wealthy, the quality of the food could announce your power long before you said a word. Now, the wealthy could eat very differently. At court or in great households, kitchens might prepare enormous quantities of food. Roasted meat, pies, fish, pottages, bread, butter, cheese, sweet dishes, spiced dishes, wine, imported ingredients. The Tudor elite had access to things that ordinary families could only imagine. Spices, especially, could signal wealth because they came through long trade networks. A wealthy feast was not just dinner. It was a public announcement. It said, we have land. We have servants. We have connections. We have food enough to waste none of your attention on modesty. And, of course, someone in the kitchen had been awake since before dawn making it happen. But the royal feast should not become our image of Tudor food as a whole. A king's dinner is not a country's dinner. A palace kitchen is not a cottage kitchen. A rich man's pie is not a farm laborer's pottage. The glamour of court food can hide the ordinary labor of feeding most people. Gardens, fields, mills, bakeries, dairies, markets, fishing boats, smokehouses, salt barrels, storage rooms, women tending pots, children carrying vegetables, workers bringing grain, people preserving what they could before winter arrived. This was the true food system. Slow, physical, seasonal, and often exhausting. And here is one final surprise. No, the Tudor table was not piled high with potatoes. Potatoes reached Europe in the 16th century, but they were not yet the widespread English staple many people imagine from later history. A Tudor meal could include many things we recognize, but it would still feel unfamiliar. No cups of tea as an everyday national habit. No coffee routine. No chocolate bar. No tomatoes casually covering everything. No mountains of potatoes beside every meal. A turkey might appear in Tudor England, but it was new enough to be interesting. The Tudor kitchen was not our kitchen wearing old clothes. It was a different world. So what did Tudor supper smell like? It smelled of bread crust, porridge, onions, herbs, smoke, cheese, ale, wet wool drying near a fire, vegetables simmering in a pot, salted fish, animal fat, ash, wood, and, on a fortunate evening, roasting meat. It smelled strong. It smelled lived in. It smelled like food prepared with labor. Not always pleasant, not always plentiful, but not simply rotten, not simply careless, not simply a joke. The Tudor stink myth fails again because it mistakes the smell of survival for the smell of indifference. People preserved food because they had to. They cooked in smoke because they had to. They ate seasonal food because there was no other choice. They stretched ingredients because the next harvest was never guaranteed. And when a pot of pottage filled a room with warmth, that smell was not proof of misery. Sometimes, it was the best thing in the house. In the next module, we will move from the supper table to the wash basin. We will look at soap, water, laundry, stains, ash, lye, and the exhausting science of trying to make cloth look clean before chemical factories, washing machines, hot plumbing, or any reasonable understanding of how much work one shirt could create. Because Tudor people did not merely wear their clothes, they fought them. Tonight, we come to the end of the road. The Tudor road. Mud beneath the boots, smoke in the hair, a little rosemary in the hand, a clean linen shirt waiting at home if you are fortunate, a fire burning low in the distance, and somewhere beyond the roofs, fields, church towers, riverbanks, palace walls, and crowded London lanes. The night settling over England. For 18 chapters, we have followed the smell of Tudor life. We have walked through the street, entered the cottage, stood in the palace, visited the kitchen, watched the laundry boil, passed the market, felt the dampness of a prison, crossed the road in rain, stood beside a grave, sat in a church full of smoke, wool, candle wax, and changing prayers. And now we can finally answer the question: what did Tudor England really smell like? The answer is not simple. It did not smell like one thing. It did not smell like a giant, permanent cloud of filth drifting slowly across the kingdom. It did not smell like roses either. It smelled like a living world. A difficult world, but a living one. Tudor England smelled of bread at dawn, of smoke rising from a hearth, of wet earth after rain, of hay drying in summer, of livestock in a farmyard, of leather in a workshop, of fish at the market, of ale in a tavern, of wax in church, of damp wool in winter, of herbs hanging from rafters, of clean linen drying in sunlight, of sweat after labor, of wood ash on wash day, of river mud near London, of perfume on a courtier's glove, of flowers held beneath a frightened nose. It smelled of everything human beings needed to survive. Food, fire, water, work, animals, cloth, shelter, faith, death, hope, and sometimes, yes, it smelled terrible. Let us not pretend otherwise. A crowded Tudor street could be foul. A tannery could be harsh. A prison could be unbearable. A ship below deck could be close, damp and stale. A market in summer could challenge every part of the human spirit. A riverbank near a growing city could make you wonder whether the river had personally offended God, and perhaps whether God had noticed. But that is not the same as saying Tudor people did not care. They cared. They cared so much that they washed their hands before meals. They cared so much that they cleaned linen. They cared so much that they combed hair. They cared so much that they used herbs, flowers, scented oils, rose water, soap, ash, lye, clean cloth, fresh rushes, open windows, smoke, vinegar, and whatever else they had available. They cared so much that a household's cleanliness became a sign of respectability. They cared so much that a white cuff could become a statement of wealth. They cared so much that a room could be swept before visitors arrived. They cared so much that a sweet scent could feel like protection. The Tudors did not lack the desire to be clean. They lacked the machines that make cleanliness easy. And perhaps easy is the wrong word. Modern cleanliness is not easy. It is hidden. That is different. We turn a tap. Water appears. We flush a toilet. Waste disappears. We press a button. Clothes wash. We open a cupboard. Soap waits. We place food in a cold box. It lasts. We throw rubbish away. A system collects it. We rarely see the labor. We rarely see the pipes. We rarely see the people behind the system. But Tudor people saw every part of it. The water had to be carried. The wood had to be cut. The fire had to be kept alive. The ash had to be saved. The linen had to be scrubbed. The bedding had to be aired. The chamber pot had to be emptied. The floor had to be swept. The animal had to be fed. The food had to be preserved. The waste had to go somewhere. And somebody had to do it. Usually, somebody with less power. The real Tudor story is not about dirt. It is about labor. A palace could smell cleaner because servants worked. A noble could wear white linen because laundresses worked. A merchant could welcome visitors into a sweet-smelling room because someone had swept, washed, aired, and arranged it. A king could enjoy a private bath because people carried water, heated it, prepared it, and cleared it away. A rich person could appear fresh because someone else handled the smoke, grease, ash, laundry, food, waste, and mess of daily life. And a poor person did much of this work themselves. They cooked, they washed, they carried, they scrubbed, they tended children, they tended animals, they repaired clothing, they kept the fire alive, they made pottage, they fetched water, they tried to dry linen before rain returned. They tried to make one room feel like a home. This is why Tudor hygiene was unequal. A king could have cleaned linen whenever he wished. A laborer may have owned only a small number of shirts. A wealthy household had servants. A poor household had tired hands. A noble had space. A prisoner had a cell. A courtier had perfume. A sailor had salt air and damp rope. A merchant had a private chamber. A family in a crowded city might have one room, one fire, and very little privacy. The weather arrived for everyone, but poverty felt it first. Rain did not matter equally. For one person, rain meant a muddy cloak. For another, it meant wet bedding, spoiled fuel, difficult laundry, ruined shoes, and no dry place to sleep. Winter did not matter equally. For one person, winter meant another fire was lit. For another, it meant the food was running low. The water was cold. The room was damp. The shirt would not dry. And another day had begun before the last one had fully ended. The Tudor world was not clean or dirty. It was uneven. That is the answer. It was uneven. A palace chamber could hold rose water, polished wood, embroidered linen, candles, silk, servants, and expensive scent. A nearby kitchen could hold smoke, grease, boiling water, roasting meat, hot ash, and exhausted workers. A rich person could travel with spare shirts. A poor traveler might arrive after days of mud, with the same clothing they had begun in. A parish church could smell of wax, stone, incense, flowers, wool, and damp earth from the graves outside. A London alley could smell like a warning. And all of this happened in the same country, sometimes on the same day, sometimes only a few streets apart. So let us return one last time to Tudor London. It is early morning. The sky is pale. The city is waking. A baker has begun work. A horse pulls a cart. A servant carries water. A market stall opens. A dog wanders through the street with no visible purpose and complete confidence. Smoke rises above the roofs. The river moves quietly beyond the buildings. In one house, somebody is washing their face. In another, a woman is stirring pottage. In another, linen is being prepared for washing. In another, someone is sick. In another, someone is dying. In another, a child is being told to comb their hair. In another, a courtier is deciding which sleeve looks most convincing. A serious political decision, naturally. The city smells complicated because the city is complicated. It smells of work. It smells of food. It smells of animals. It smells of waste. It smells of money. It smells of poverty. It smells of people trying to live close together without enough space, enough water, enough fuel, enough privacy, or enough time. And then imagine the countryside. A village, a farmyard, a field under morning mist, a woman opening a door, a man walking toward animals, a child carrying something too large for them. The smell there is different. Damp grass, cows, wood smoke, fresh earth, hay, milk, rain, the first warm bread of the morning. Not clean in a modern way, but not foul without meaning. The countryside smells like survival. The city smells like survival crowded together. The palace smells like survival hidden under velvet. The past seems dirtier when we only look at its worst places. Imagine that someone from Tudor England could visit us. They arrive in a modern city. They see tall buildings, bright windows, cars, concrete, electric lights, plastic, glass. They hear machines. They see food in sealed packets. They watch water appear from taps. They watch waste disappear from toilets. They see a washing machine spin clothing until it becomes dry enough to wear. They would be astonished, perhaps frightened, perhaps delighted, perhaps suspicious of the glowing screens. But then, they might walk through a railway station at rush hour. They might pass a fast food bin in summer. They might enter a badly maintained public bathroom. They might stand beside traffic fumes. They might smell a crowded bus. They might discover the fridge in a shared apartment. And suddenly, the Tudor person might feel less impressed. Because every age has its smells. Every age has waste. Every age has systems that fail. Every age has people who are clean because somebody else is doing difficult work out of sight. Every age has people who cannot stay clean because they lack water, space, safety, money, housing, or control. This is why the Tudor stink myth matters. It is not only a mistake about the past. It is a mistake about the present. It lets us believe that cleanliness is a personal virtue instead of a shared system. It lets us think that people who smell poor must be careless. It lets us forget the work behind every clean room, every fresh shirt, every clear glass of water, every clean hospital bed, every safe street, every empty bin, every functioning drain. Cleanliness is never only personal. It is social. The Tudor people understood this in a direct, physical way. They knew a house could become unpleasant when water was scarce. They knew laundry required labor. They knew a market needed cleaning. They knew waste had to be removed. They knew a sick room could become dangerous. They knew fresh linen could make a person feel respectable. They knew a bowl of water before dinner mattered. They knew foul air felt threatening. They knew a sweet scent could bring comfort. They were wrong about some things. They did not know why disease spread. They believed bad air itself carried sickness. They used treatments that could harm people. They did not understand germs. They had no modern sanitation, no antibiotics, no refrigeration, no washing machines, no easy way to separate food, animals, waste, work, and sleeping space in a crowded home. But they were not foolish for trying. A pomander could not stop plague, but it told us a person wanted protection. A washed shirt could not remove every danger, but it told us someone cared. Herbs in a room could not solve a bad drain. But they told us a household wanted comfort. A comb could not defeat every louse forever. But it told us people fought back. The Tudor world was full of small acts of resistance. Against smell. Against dirt. Against illness. Against weather. Against hunger. Against grief. Against the humiliating fact that a person could spend hours washing, mending, sweeping, scrubbing, airing, preparing, and arranging, only for the rain to begin. The rain, as always, had no remorse. And now, perhaps, we can understand why the Tudors valued things that seem ordinary to us. A fresh linen shirt, a clean tablecloth, a comb, a bowl, a cloth, a sprig of rosemary, a scented glove, a warm fire, a dry bed, a room swept before guests arrived. These were not small things. They were victories. A clean shirt could mean the household had enough water, enough soap, enough time, enough labor, enough cloth, enough hope. A dry bed could mean the roof had held. The fire had lasted. The weather had not won. A bowl of warm pottage could mean the harvest had been enough. A scented room could mean someone had thought about the people inside it. The Tudors were not living in a world without cleanliness. They were living in a world where cleanliness had to be earned. And that is the final truth. Not that Tudor England smelled good. Not that it smelled bad. But that every smell had a story. Smoke meant warmth. Ash meant laundry. Mud meant roads and rain. Hay meant animals would eat in winter. Salted meat meant food would last. Rosewater meant dignity. Incense meant worship. Leather meant work. Bread meant survival. Fresh linen meant labor. A foul river meant a growing city struggling with itself. A closed sick room meant fear. A churchyard meant memory. And somewhere, always somewhere, a person was trying to make the world a little more bearable. A mother washing a child's face. A servant airing bedding. A farmer scraping mud from boots. A sailor combing his hair. A washerwoman wrestling with linen. A courtier adding scent to a glove. A cook stirring the pot. A priest lighting a candle. A neighbor carrying water. A family opening a window when the weather allowed. These are not grand moments. They do not appear in royal portraits. They are not recorded in treaties. They do not change the fate of kingdoms. But they are history. They are the hidden history. The history of bodies, hands, rooms, clothing, food, smell. The history of people trying to remain human inside a world that could be cold, smoky, muddy, hungry, sick, crowded, and unfair. And perhaps that is why the myth should end here. Not because Tudor England deserves to be romanticized. It does not. We should not pretend its streets were clean. Its medicine was safe. Its cities were sanitary. Its homes were comfortable. Its prisons were humane. Its food was always plentiful. Its water was always safe. Its society was fair. But neither should we turn Tudor people into a joke. They were not dirty little figures wandering through a brown world without self-respect. They were people. They were tired. They were resourceful. They were vain. They were frightened. They were practical. They loved pleasant scents. They hated foul rooms. They wanted clean hands. They wanted fresh food. They wanted dry clothes. They wanted their children to be healthy. They wanted their homes to feel safe. They wanted to be remembered kindly. And after all these years, That is what reaches us across the smoke. Not the smell of failure, the smell of effort. Ali. So now, let the Tudor streets grow quiet. Let the market close. Let the kitchen fire burn lower. Let the last candle in the church flicker against the stone. Let the palace servants finish their work. Let the farmyard settle. Let the horses breathe in the dark. Let the river move past London, carrying its secrets away. And somewhere in a small Tudor house, let a clean piece of linen hang near the fire, drying slowly, waiting for morning. Because tomorrow, the smoke will return, the mud will return, the work will return, the laundry will return, and the people of Tudor England will begin again. Ali, if this quiet journey through the past helped you relax, you are always welcome back at DreamTime Historian. Subscribe and join us for another slow, peaceful journey through history. Until then, let the old world fade into darkness. Good night, and sleep.